Denver Broncos rookie quarterback Bo Nix is making history just by starting week one against the Seattle Seahawks. But can the Broncos get the job done against a tough Seattle team? We're going to talk about that and more in today's Crossover Thursday episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy regular season to the 12s and Broncos fans out there. We've got week one on tap, which means the first crossover Thursday of the 2024 season. Seahawks hosting the Broncos. I'm Corbin Smith from the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Glad to be joined by Sayre Bedinger of the Locked On Broncos podcast. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into an exciting matchup between former AFC West rivals at Lumen Field. Key storylines. We're going to be looking at some predictions, keys to victory. Going to be a really fun first crossover show, which is brought your way by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedInNFL to win $50 off instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win it to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's get rolling here. We are starting the 2024 season. And again, a special thanks to all the 12s and Broncos fans out there, whether you're listening in Bellevue, Washington, or in my neck of the woods, Johnstown, Colorado. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Broncos your first listen 5 days a week. Sayre, the regular season is upon us. And these two teams, the Seahawks and Broncos, obviously very familiar. This is the second time in a handful of years they've opened the season against each other, but both teams look much different, both on the sidelines and with who's going to be taking snaps. A number of the players are different from that matchup a few years back that much anticipated at the time. Russell Wilson homecoming to Denver. Wilson no longer in the mix. And I know that leads perfectly. We're talking storylines heading into week one, and there's just a boatload of them for both of these teams. But for the Broncos on offense, obviously without Russell Wilson being in town anymore, not going to see that reunion a second time in 4 years, but we do get to see a first start for an incoming rookie quarterback for the Broncos. And I know that fans in Denver are extremely excited to see what this kid can bring to the table as a day one starter.
Yeah, Bo Nix making the first week one start for a rookie quarterback in Broncos history, at least since John Elway in 1983. He's the first quarterback actually drafted by the Broncos since the Broncos did acquire John in a trade with the Colts back in the day. The first round pick at quarterback to start week one for this team that was actually drafted by the team. Sean Payton's first ever first round quarterback that he's drafted. So there's a lot on Bo Nix's shoulders coming into this week against Seattle. And you know, Corbin, the more I think about it, the more I'm trying to remember, when's the last time the Broncos weren't debuting a new quarterback against the Seahawks? I know the last time these two teams played, it was obviously Russell's debut for the Broncos in Seattle there. And then before that, I think it was Case Keenum's debut for the Broncos when they played in Denver to open up the 2018 season. So unfortunate theme here for the Denver Broncos is debuting new quarterbacks. But look, with Bo Nix, the hope and the optimism is that, man, he can end this ugly quarterback carousel that the Denver Broncos have been on, which really came to an unfortunate and disappointing end with Russell Wilson this past offseason.
I know Seahawks fans had kind of a difficult time. There were obviously some that were, with the way Russell Wilson's end in Seattle happened, there were some that were saying, well, there's some karma here with forcing your way out of town. But I know most Seahawks fans were disappointed to see the way that things ended on that front, and they wanted to see Russell be successful, at least after that first game coming back to Seattle. They wanted to see him be successful, but obviously did not work out. So the Broncos, they're back to the drawing board with Bo Nix. And what's interesting about this Broncos offense, and my co-host Rob Rang, who works with me the first three episodes of the week, does scouting for the CFL, has had a chance to watch the Broncos when they had their joint practices against the Green Bay Packers, was talking about the interesting weapons that Bo Nix is going to have at his disposal. And really, that's got to be one of the biggest question marks going into the season, how the Broncos are going to use those players, especially after trading Jerry Jeudy. And now you've got Marvin Mims and a number of other young receivers that are stepping into roles. How big of a storyline do you view that going into this season opener? Not just the fact you got a rookie quarterback, but how he's going to distribute the football.
Well, I think that is a huge storyline because we saw Cortland Sutton kind of have one of his best years of his career last year with the Broncos, catching 10 touchdown passes, and the team has allegedly turned down a number of trade offers for him. So he's expected to be a focal point. But the question marks are from guys like Javonte Williams, who we didn't see him play well last year coming back from that knee injury at running back. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, he's kind of an unknown still to a lot of people out there, although he played a relatively large role last year for an undrafted rookie running back in Denver. He's expected to take on a bigger role. Greg Dulcich, we haven't seen a ton of him in his first 2 years. He's got to play a big role in the passing game as well. Marvin Mims didn't play a ton last year as a rookie, and we didn't see a lot of him in the preseason either. So what are we getting from any of these guys? Josh Reynolds, good veteran player, solid veteran receiver, should help a rookie quarterback like Bo Nix. But again, is he a featured weapon in the passing game type of guy? And I know a lot of people may be wondering about Troy Franklin. Kind of sounds like the Broncos could be playing it slow with the rookie out of Oregon there and expecting him to maybe not redshirt the whole season, but kind of just play in spots. But the one guy they really like, Corbin, is Devon Vele, a 7th-round rookie out of Utah, who has really impressed all throughout the offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing a much bigger role than is expected here in week 1.
Flipping over to the defensive side of the football, there's a pretty big name that isn't going to be back in blue and orange this year for the Broncos as well. Justin Simmons, now in Atlanta, being released in the spring and then eventually landing with the Falcons earlier in August. There's plenty of changes on that side of the ball, but I know there's one position group, and Rob was echoing this on our podcast on Tuesday. There's one position group that there just seems to be the utmost optimism and excitement about with this defense going into week 1.
Absolutely. That's the defensive line. The Denver Broncos defensive front is vastly improved as of this offseason, making the trade for John Franklin Myers with the New York Jets, who are trying to dump some salary when they got Hassan Reddick. And so the Broncos benefited from that, getting John Franklin Myers, who brings a new level of physicality to, guys like you're familiar with. Zach Allen, formerly of the Arizona Cardinals, expected to have a big season this year. Another guy you may be familiar with, DJ Jones, formerly of the 49ers. So they have guys on that defensive front now, whereas last year they were starting players like Jonathan Harris and Matt Henningsen playing significant snaps, Mike Purcell. The Broncos just upgraded substantially there, and they've got a healthy Baron Browning off the edge, and the team is extremely high on him. So that defensive front, it could be the most improved unit on this entire roster going into 2024.
Yeah, you mentioned see cringe about it a little bit, especially DJ Jones. I don't know what it was when DJ Jones was in San Francisco. The guy played like an all-pro every time the 49ers played the Seahawks. And so that is going to be a name that is unfortunately a familiar one. And certainly that is an improved defensive line that the Seahawks are going to have to worry about. And also I know there's a contract situation that is on the minds of Broncos faithful as well in the secondary with the best player, in my opinion, that's on the Broncos' entire roster.
Absolutely. Pat Surtain, definitely the best player on the Broncos roster, getting rewarded with his contract and not 4 years, $96 million, the highest paid defensive back in NFL history, and certainly worthy of that distinction based on what we've seen in his first 3 seasons. Hasn't even given up a single season with 60% completion rate into his coverage, 7 interceptions, 36 passes broken up so far through 3 seasons for PS2. And when guys throw his direction, you kind of almost get excited as a Broncos fan that, hey, if you want to throw at Pat Surtain, go ahead, but we'll see. I mean, as we know, the Seahawks have a very tough wide receiver group to test Pat Surtain. So I think this game initially here to start the season, he's going to have to go out there and start earning that contract right away.
As you mentioned, the Seahawks receivers going against the Broncos corners, including Pat Surtain, certainly going to be one of the must-see, get your popcorn ready matchups going into this game. When we come back here on Crossover Thursday, we're going to flip the script to the Seahawks and key storylines for the home team going into the debut for Mike McDonald as the new head coach. That'll be coming up next year on our Crossover Thursday edition on the Locked On Podcast Network. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you one win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. For week 1, I'm going to be projecting Ken Walker III to eclipse 50.5 rushing yards and Geno Smith to surpass 1.5 touchdown passes on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's with the code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday, Week 1 edition. We've got the Seahawks and Broncos getting ready to clash at Lumen Field on Sunday in their respective season openers. I'm Corbin Smith for the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Glad to be joined on today's show by Sayre Bedinger of the Locked On Broncos podcast. And a special thanks to all the 12s and Broncos fans out there, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Broncos your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. First, the madman, Tyler Rowland, kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman, Tyler Rowland, and the barber, Tony Wiggins, your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. The Seahawks entering a new era for the first time since 2010. It has been a long time since somebody not named Pete Carroll has been roaming the sideline chewing bubblegum. That is still going to be a little bit of an oddity for Seahawk fans, even though they've seen it now in a preseason game. First regular season game with Mike McDonald at the helm. And certainly it's interesting, Sarah, when you look at these two teams because they're so different compared to the last time that they met. But mainly for the Seahawks, the big difference is on the sidelines. The Broncos obviously have a different head coach as well, but they've got the new quarterback. Seattle's got a little more continuity, at least from a player perspective, going into this matchup in week 1.
Definitely a lot of players that Broncos fans will be familiar with from actually just watching last year out of curiosity, seeing them in 2022. But I'm interested to know exactly, as we talk about that Seahawks offense, new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, what he's bringing to the table and how he's adjusting to the continuity in terms of that player personnel, because we know the Seahawks have the playmakers, and Geno Smith has proven he can get those playmakers the football. They've got no shortage of guys they can distribute the ball to. What have you seen so far this offseason in terms of how this offense is all going to come together with a new coordinator?
That is obviously the biggest storyline going into week 1 for the Seahawks on offense, just how Geno Smith meshes with this scheme. Now, if it's going to look like training camp and the 5-play dress rehearsal they had against the Cleveland Browns last week, Seahawk fans are going to be booking trips to New Orleans. This is probably what we're going to be seeing right now because, look, this is not hyperbole. Geno Smith has looked fantastic running this offense in training camp. Literally had 5 plays against the Browns, and I know that the Browns were playing second and third stringers with some of their starters, but still just real quick down the field, less than 2 minutes, touchdown drive, 21-yard touchdown to DK Metcalf, and that's what it's looked like in training camp. And obviously, Ryan Grubb has not taken the training wheels off yet either. It's been a very vanilla preseason slate. He's going to be looking to open up that playbook some, so there is excitement. At the same time, Denver's got the defensive line that you mentioned that is much improved. Geno Smith is going to have time to be able to get the football to his playmakers. Jack Smith and Jigba with a chance for a sophomore explosion to go with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. They still think Noah Fant has a chance to really do well in this offense. Got a couple of really good running backs, but it's going to really boil down to the offensive line. So as far as storylines going into this game, want to see what Geno Smith looks like going against a full group of starters in this offense. Are they going to be able to continue that hype train that's been coming out of training camp in the preseason, moving the ball over the place, slinging it, getting that run game going? And is the offensive line going to be able to get the job done so that Geno Smith and those skill players can play to their very best? That is really the biggest storyline here. Is Connor Williams going to be able to play their new center? That would be a huge boost for them, especially without Abe Lucas being available at right tackle. Is Charles Cross going to continue his ascendance at the left tackle position? Is Anthony Bradford going to play well at right guard? Laken Tomlinson, does he still have some juice left in the tank? There's plenty of questions there. Can the offensive line start to silence some of those questions a little bit against a pretty good defensive front here for this first game? So I'm looking at the scheme and the offensive line allowing that scheme to be able to function properly in this opener on offense. If the Seahawks are able to check those two boxes off, then playing in front of their home crowd, they got to feel pretty good about their chances. But there's a lot of unknowns here, especially with a coordinator who's never been an NFL coordinator in Ryan Grubb.
Yeah, and that I guess that mystery of the unknown kind of translates over to the defensive side of the ball as well, where obviously we've seen what Mike McDonald can do in terms of, man, obviously a great coordinator there at Baltimore, did his thing at Michigan as well. He's had success at every stop. There's been a lot of personnel change for the Seahawks up front defensively. I know last year the defensive line was a question mark, and that kind of led to the Byron Murphy selection this year. So is that kind of your biggest focus defensively right now, is kind of just seeing how all of these pieces come together now that it's no longer the Pete Carroll show in Seattle, McDonald putting his imprint, especially on that side of the ball?
It's all about gelling early in the season, and there's been a lot of encouraging things from this defense so far in training camp and the preseason. At least when we've gotten to see the ones on the field, they have looked pretty darn good. You're seeing the talent up front. You're seeing the secondary talent with Devin Witherspoon and Reek Woolen headlining that group, two guys with superstar upside, and they've shown it early in their careers. Linebacker is still probably the biggest question for the Seahawks going into this season. No more Bobby Wagner, no more Jordan Brooks. You've got Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker. Baker's missed most of training camp with a hamstring injury. So those are some of the questions you're dealing with. Not having Baker on the field very much with this new defense, and the fact that really all these guys, for the most part, this is a new defensive scheme for them. What are the growing pains going to look like early in the season? Because this is not an easy defense to get down. Mike McDonald in Baltimore's players talked about it. The expectations in terms of communication and understanding what your teammates are doing. And Seahawks players have talked about this throughout this process, that you don't only have to know your job. And, you know, if you're a free safety, you got to know strong safety. You got to know linebacker. You got to know slot corner. Heck, you got to know what the D line is doing, because Mike McDonald moves players all over the place. And it's all about that pre and post snap disguising, giving a look that the quarterback is going to be confused by, and then turning around and doing something else after the snap. And in order to do that, you got to have guys that are indispensable, that you can play at a number of different positions. And so I wonder if the communication is going to be on point. To this point, it's looked good. But in the regular season, when you're going against a starting offense, as when you got a rookie quarterback on the other side, are you going to be able to run the defense the way you want to make life difficult on that quarterback without having some assignment breakdowns because the communication is still not there? That would be the biggest concern for me. But overall, this is a defensive group that's got a lot of talented pieces. They love that they got Leonard Williams back. They're hoping Uchenna Nwosu can play this week. We don't know yet whether that's going to happen or not, but they like their edge rushing group. Devin Witherspoon, especially in the secondary, they are fired up about his upside in this scheme with his blitzing ability, his physicality, multiplicity, playing multiple positions. They've got a number of guys they're excited about. The question's going to boil down to, can they play anywhere close to their potential early from a communication standpoint? Because this is the time of year with a new defense, a new coach. You're going to have some of those growing pains. You're just hoping that it isn't going to be massive growing pains early in the season, and that those mistakes are not going to cost you games down the line.
And that's kind of where I think the Broncos are at, going up against that defense, right? Is having a rookie quarterback operating Sean Payton's offense, which is also kind of known for its complexity through the years, and having a lot, really long drawn out calls, and Bo Nix having to do that and execute that on the road against a fast and talented defense, even if they are, dealing with communication issues on that side of the ball. It kind of could go both ways in that regard, when you have a rookie under center operating the show there. So I think that's going to make for a really interesting chess match in this particular game, having those two kind of new elements on either side of the ball. I guess when both teams are out there, because the Broncos, they're not necessarily breaking in a new scheme defensively either, but they have a lot of new players. So it's a lot of new for both of these teams as we get to week one. And I guess we'll kind of see which team has, like you said, you've seen it on the practice field this offseason for the Seahawks. Broncos have seen the same thing, really good execution so far. Now we get to the real deal, and we'll see which of these two teams can come out on top.
With the real bullet set to start flying on Sunday at Lumen Field, what do the Seahawks and the Broncos have to do to get that week one victory and start the season off on a good note? We're going to dive into that up next here on our Crossover Thursday edition here, week one, Locked On Podcast Network. We'll be right back. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. As a site manager at Seahawks on SI, LinkedIn Jobs is my go-to to post writing positions to get top candidates. The process has been made so much easier. It's seamless. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, and the process is so easy. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even quicker. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the first Crossover Thursday edition of the 2024 season. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be joined by Sayre Bedinger of Locked On Broncos. A special thanks to all the 12s and Broncos fans out there for making Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Broncos your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code, all lowercase, LockedInNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. Seahawks and Broncos week one, former AFC West rivals battling at Lumen Field, both looking to get off to fast starts. And obviously, as you mentioned earlier, Sayre, a lot of newness for both teams, different degrees of newness. Obviously, the quarterback situation in Denver, the new coaching staff in Seattle. First time Pete Carroll isn't on the sideline since way back in 2009. So there's plenty of big changes for both these teams going into a game that creates a lot of uncertainty in week one, more so than there already is. Week one is always kind of a wild card when it comes to what you're going to see of the preseason, how limited the starters typically are for teams in the league. Now, let's get to the most important things for both teams to accomplish to win this football game. And we'll start with the visiting Denver Broncos. And Sayre, you mentioned all the newness, particularly with Bo Nix, first NFL regular season start. He gets to go to one of the loudest venues in the NFL. Not an easy test, but when you look at this game from a Broncos perspective, what are the three most important things that are jumping out to you that Denver has to accomplish to get out of Lumen Field with a season opening win?
Well, I think number one, you want to see Bo Nix get into rhythm and keeping him in rhythm, especially when they're, mixing the run in the pass game. Number two, you want to see the Broncos defensive front putting pressure on Geno Smith early and often. And number three, seeing this young secondary stepping up, which against this Seattle Seahawks wide receiver group, that could end up being one of the most key matchups of the game, because we know Pat Surtain, he can hold down his side of the field. But on the other side, the Broncos do have some question marks. It could be Riley Moss, a second-year player out of Iowa, out there at the cornerback position. It could be the veteran Levi Wallace getting some more playing time this week as the Broncos kind of try to acclimate Riley Moss into the mix, because he hasn't played outside corner at this point yet in the NFL, aside from a couple preseason games. So that to me is one of those situations to where we know the Seahawks have guys who can make plays at wide receiver and they can spread the ball around. Do the Broncos have the guys that can keep up with them in coverage, especially because of their youth back there, not only at corner, but at the safety position, where PJ Locke taking on a full-time starting role this coming season after kind of having a breakout year last year for the Broncos, and Brandon Jones coming in free agency from the Dolphins. A lot of Broncos fans concerned about Brandon because he was injured in OTAs. He was hurt throughout training camp in the preseason. We have not yet seen Brandon Jones play a game as a member of the Denver Broncos. So this week one, assuming he plays, this will be the first time we all see number 22 out there. And so it's going to be a very interesting sort of experience for everybody in real time to kind of figure out what is Vance Joseph's new look secondary going to be able to do against maybe what could be their biggest test of the season in terms of Seattle's personnel.
The Broncos want Bo Nix to get comfortable. They want him to get in a rhythm. The Seahawks want to do the exact opposite in this game. They want the crowd noise to get to the rookie. They want the pass rush to get after him. But to me, most importantly, put everything on Bo Nix's shoulders. Don't let the Broncos get their run game going with Javonte Williams and company, because that is the best way to come into Lumen. And Seattle's run defense has been god-awful the last 2 years. They've been 30th and 31st in the NFL the last 2 seasons. Mike McDonald's hoping to immediately come in and remedy that issue. And so far, the returns have been promising. But you've got to limit the run game and put everything on Bo Nix's plate. To me, that's the first key for the Seahawks in this game. Force Bo Nix to beat you in his NFL regular season debut. If he ends up doing it, then more power to him. But force the young quarterback to have to shoulder the load and beat you. And then on the offensive side of the football, it's going to seem very elementary, but you got to keep Geno Smith upright in this game. You mentioned the talent that the Broncos have on their defensive line. That is probably my biggest concern on either side of the football coming in this game, because Seattle doesn't have Abraham Lucas back yet from his knee injury. We don't know if Connor Williams is going to be available to play in this game coming off the torn ACL. Signs are trending towards him being available, but there are a lot of question marks still on that offensive line. It isn't going to matter if Jackson Smith and Jigba is ready for a breakout year, or Tyler Lockett still can get it done, or DK Metcalf is poised to go for a team record of receiving yards. None of that matters if Geno Smith does not have time to throw the football. And so that is going to be a big question here, because if he has time, if the Seahawks offensive line is able to protect him, he's able to stay upright. As you mentioned, I do think if there's an area the Seahawks have a big advantage, even against Pat Surtain, DK Metcalf had success against him a couple years ago. That is one of the few receivers that creates a little bit of a matchup issue for Pat Surtain. And the rest of the secondary's got a lot of question marks. Seattle does not have question marks at receiver. They are loaded there. Even their number 4 and 5 receivers, Jake Bobo and Laviska Shenault, are really good football players. They've got a lot of weapons, but Geno Smith's got to have time to throw. If they give him that time with the home crowd behind him, I think Seattle has a chance to put a lot of points on the board, but that is a big question mark. Are they going to be able to do that? And then at home, you got to win the turnover battle, especially when you're playing a rookie quarterback making his NFL regular season debut. It's elementary, but you got to win the turnover battle. This is a defense that Mike McDonald in Baltimore orchestrated that created a lot of havoc with their pre and post snap changes, with the complexity of the defense, the blitzes and the sim packages, all different levels of the defense. They're looking to create turnovers. And that was something the Baltimore Ravens were as good as anybody at the last couple of years. So the Seahawks going to be able to pick that up with some of the talented players they have up front. And in the secondary, this will be a little bit of a litmus test going against a rookie quarterback and an offense that's got some question marks with some of the pieces they're trying to implement. So can you win the turnover battle? I think if they win the turnover battle in this game, their chances of winning go up exponentially, because I do feel like the Seahawks have a little bit more continuity and a little more proven experience at a number of positions. But again, it boils down to O-line protection. And are you going to be able to get some of those turnovers to get some quick changes, get the ball back into Geno Smith's hands and try to get some points on the scoreboard quickly? Looking at this game from a FanDuel perspective with our betting lines, the Seahawks coming in at 5.5-point favorites at home. Over-under's a little on the lower side at 41.5. I'm not really that surprised by that, Sayre, because we are going to the game with a rookie quarterback making his first start in Denver, so there's some question marks there. And even with Seattle, with all the talent that they've got, you've got a new offensive coordinator, and so nobody really knows what to expect in the regular season. So I'm not surprised it's on a little lower end in terms of over-under. But from a prediction standpoint, we'll dive into scores on our Friday shows, respectively, on Locked On Seahawks and the Locked On Broncos. But 5.5 points, underdogs. Do you see the Broncos covering that, or do you see this being a game where that 5.5 ends up being difficult for them to cover?
I do think they can cover that. I think this Broncos team is going to be better than a lot of people expect. We're used to hearing the number 5.5 from FanDuel this offseason, as that's the Broncos win total projection as well. So I've been smashing the over on 5.5 all offseason long, and I'm just glad the over under is not set at 50.5 because 43 and 8, those two numbers combined together, that still inflicts a little bit of terror in the hearts of Broncos country there. But I do think the Broncos can cover 5.5 points. I think they're going to be a better team overall than is expected this year. That doesn't mean they're not going to get their butts kicked every now and again, but I think they're going to be able to hang in this game, and we'll see what happens in terms of win-loss. But I think they are going to be playing everybody tight this season.
There is not a game on the schedule that's more unpredictable than week one, and that's just for all 32 teams. You just don't know what to expect. And I look at this game. Look, I have really high expectations for what this Broncos team could become down the line. And I think in week one, you never know what you're going to get. So 5.5, that might be a little bit rich for me right now for the Seahawks, even playing at home, because there is a lot of newness for both these teams. So I don't have them covering that. Now, does that mean I have them winning or losing? You'll have to listen to tomorrow's episode to find out. But I expect that this is going to be a tight game. I think the Denver Broncos have more talent than people are giving them credit for. In fact, I could see Denver, if things fall right, being the second best team in the AFC West, because I think the Chargers have questions. The Raiders certainly have questions. So I could see this being a team, if everything falls right for Sean Payton, that ends up being much better than advertised. Not saying it's a playoff team, but certainly could be a team that rises up the division standings and starts to pave a brighter future moving forward after the last couple of years just didn't play out as planned. But I do think this is going to be a very close game, and I expect it's going to be back and forth. Week one is crazy as it is. The newness on both sides. I expect this to be a very competitive game. We'll find out tomorrow, though, on Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Broncos, who we expect to win this game. Make sure you are listening in to both podcasts. You can follow me on X at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Sayre at Sayre Bedinger. Subscribe or follow Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast for the latest episode as soon as it's available. And also make sure to check out Locked On NFL for your second listen. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. You've got the madman, Tyler Rowland, with a double shot of NFL Espresso in the morning, and then the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. So make sure to make both those Locked On NFL podcasts your second listen on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We'll have Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks coming up tomorrow. There'll also be an awesome Friday show for Locked On Broncos as we gear up for the season opener at Lumen Field. Make sure that you are listening, and thanks for tuning in to this first Crossover Thursday edition on the Locked On Podcast Network. Go Hawks, go Broncos. Thanks for tuning in.